Randy Gregory is out in Tampa Bay. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this live episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. Some reaction to the Buccaneers' loss to the Jacksonville Jaguars over the weekend coming up in a little bit, but let's start with the biggest news and a story that everyone knew was coming. It was just a matter of when. So, according to multiple reports, and first reported by Chris Myers during the Buccaneers broadcast of their preseason game on Saturday, the Buccaneers are releasing edge rusher Randy Gregory. The Bucs reached an agreement with Gregory after he missed all the mandatory activities as well as training camp and the first 2 preseason games. The fines for Gregory added up to $1,377,549, which was also his guaranteed salary for the year, meaning the Bucs are not on the hook for that money, and it will be added back to their cap space. Gregory is currently involved in a lawsuit with the National Football League, which was filed back in June, and it likely played into his absence, although Todd Bowles said that the Bucs never got a reason as to why he didn't show up. Bowles told the media, quote, "No, I never found out. I wish him the best. We'll move on from there. You can't miss what you never had," end quote. That to me is pretty telling. But Todd Bowles is 100% right. The Bucs never really had Randy Gregory, so why bother complaining about him not being there or missing him in the rotation? They never knew what he was going to bring to the table in this defense, and they're likely better off moving forward with what they already have rather than deal with somebody who apparently didn't want to be there. He signed his contract, he signed that prove-it year, and now not only is he probably, not only is he not going to be a member of the Buccaneers, but he's probably played his last snap in the NFL because other teams are going to look at this situation and go, do we really want to sign a guy that obviously has no interest in playing football? He didn't want to show up for mandatory minicamp. He didn't want to show up for training camp, didn't want to show up for preseason games. Why bother wasting our time? He obviously doesn't want to play football. But we are going to talk about what the Bucs already have at edge rusher. And while the Bucs did lose to the Jags, there were still moments worth talking about in a positive light. Lots of more of those coming up. But one of the things that I want to focus on right now was the pass rush and more promise building off of last week's game against the Cincinnati Bengals. I talked about it then that it showed promise against the Bengals. They were getting pressure. They needed to parlay that into finishing plays and getting sacks. Well, this time around, they finished plays and they got sacks, most notably Jose Ramirez, who had 3 sacks on the night. Marquise Watts also added a sack, and the 2 relatively unknown edge guys coming into this season are continuing to make noise in the preseason. We've talked about it on this show. I've talked about it with Evan. The Bucs were really, really high on Marquise Watts and Jose Ramirez, neither of which really got much of an opportunity last year, but now they are thrust into the rotation given the lack of depth there, and they are making the most of that opportunity. I again thought that Chris Braswell looked pretty good, but he still has plenty of work to do. On one of Ramirez's sacks, I noticed that Braswell had his guy beat and likely would have come away with a sack, but Ramirez just happened to get there first. He was quicker off the snap. He was, he got around his lineman a little bit faster. It ended in a sack. If Ramirez gets locked up, I think Braswell comes away with a big sack right there. And Todd Bowles talked about Braswell on Sunday saying, quote, he's had a good week. Last week, he had a good week of practice. There are some technical things we've got to work on. Hand placement and getting off the ball with his feet, correcting those types of things. He's going to help us a lot this year. I'm very pleased with his performance, end quote. At the end of the day, he is still a rookie, and there are going to be some growing pains. Yaya Diaby came on in the second half of the season last year. Shaq Barrett was obviously a very late bloomer, and that took years, not months, to get to the point where he became the Bucs' single-season sack leader in franchise history. With Watts and Ramirez playing the way they are, plus Braswell continuing to grow and develop, then you have the return of Yaya Diaby and JTS, who will, according to Todd Bowles, will be ready for week 1 of the season. This rotation might just be all right over the course of the year. Unfortunately, there's absolutely no room for error. If one of those guys goes down with an injury, things get really thin really fast. Yes, it would have been great if the Buccaneers could have made a move like Atlanta did for Matthew Judon. And for all we know, Jason Light is looking for a way to replace Randy Gregory in this rotation and bring in someone else. But the edge rush overall seems to be able to hold its own for right now. They still have not been on the field with the full complement of defensive help and star power. So the edge rush will only continue to improve given once they get all those different looks and all that additional talent coming onto the field and commanding attention from opposing offenses. Those guys are going to be able to get more one-on-one opportunities. There's going to be, guys like Levante David and Vita Vea and Kalijah Cansey and Antoine Winfield Jr., Christian Izzy, and all these other guys that Todd Bowles loves to send on blitzes. Those guys are going to command attention. The edge rush will benefit from that full complement of a Todd Bowles defense. I am still very encouraged by what I have seen so far. The edge rush has been far better than I expected it to be through those first 2 preseason games, but this has been against second and third stringers. So let's see how they look against the first team Dolphins offense this week in practice, as well as the final preseason game when we're going to see a lot of those starters play. Going to jump into the live chat real quick, and I got to give a shout out to my dude, Yusef. Yusef, it has been way too long, but he is in the live chat just saying, hashtag go Bucks. Love to see that. Yusef, for those of you, newbies that don't remember back when we had a voicemail line before things kind of fell apart there, we were having a lot of technical issues with that. Yusef was a regular caller into our voicemail line. It is great to see you again in here. Narav in the chat says, maybe we can use Randy's money to trade for Reddick. That is something that I brought up last week. You can go back. The title on the thumbnail for that episode on YouTube is Revisiting Reddick. While I think that would be a great move to be able to try and trade for him, as obviously things have broken down between him and the New York Jets, Evan Klosky also talked about it and mentioned that the Bucs might be better off rolling their cap space from this year into next year when you have a lot of these contracts that they signed, that start next year really kicking in. Baker gets a lot of money. Tristan gets a lot of money. Antoine, Mike, you might be able to use some of that rollover to re-sign Chris Godwin. There's going to be a lot of different pieces. While I think Hassan Reddick would be a huge addition for this Buccaneers defense financially and long-term, it may make more sense to not go down that road. And we'll just have to continue to see how guys like Braswell and Jose Ramirez and Marquise Watts really continue to develop throughout the regular season against these number one offenses. A lot of you are talking about some of the other things that happened in the game. Al Bundy in the chat said, what happens with Randy's 1.365 million guarantee? Does he still get it? I hope not. I did already cover this, but you joined in a little bit late. So because all the fines that Gregory had accumulated added up to his guaranteed money, that guarantee money is now void. And the Bucs do not have to spend it. It goes back into the salary cap space that they have. So it pretty much offset Randy's guarantees. That's likely, even though we don't have the full details, that is likely the settlement that they have reached, where it's, okay, you've been fined this much, you don't have to pay us, but it voided all of your guaranteed money, and things are all back to square one. Some more things that I loved against the Jaguars. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, brake rotors, and so much more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. It takes all of the stress away from shopping for parts for your car, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen or view every single day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. Get daily insight to the best fantasy draft strategies so you can win your league this season. A part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Had my fantasy football draft on Sunday. This league has been going for 23 years. That is a very long time to be in the same fantasy league, but we always have a great time. I was able to snag Rachaad White and Chris Godwin for my roster. Really excited about that. You all know how much I love those two guys this season, and how big of an impact I think they are going to make. But even in a preseason loss, there were more positive takeaways for the Buccaneers, and I want to shed some light on some of those real quickly. For those of you in the live chat, Bat W, Fire the Cannons, Go Bucs, Destined for Greatness, Yousev, Jay Jones, Richard, all you guys start dropping things that you were happy about, and I will get to those here in just a little bit. But for starters, Bucky Irving and Sean Tucker once again looked fantastic. Tucker rushed 4 times for 32 yards and had another explosive play, and what a play it was. That cutback and being able to find that open space and get a really impressive gain, it was fantastic. But even if you remove that explosive play from Tucker's box score, he was still just a tick below 4 yards per carry. Again, a massive improvement over his yards per carry last year. And then Irving, 6 carries for 26 yards, just over 4 yards per carry. He is so quick and he is so shifty. Pro Football Focus dropped a nice little stat that I wanted to share with you. Bucky Irving has four forced missed tackles. Say that 3 times fast. 4 forced missed tackles on 12 total carries, and 63% of his yardage this preseason has come after contact. That is outstanding. 1 out of every 3 carries he is forcing missed tackles, and he continues to grind and gain yardage even after the first hit. That's what you want to see out of your run game, and that's exactly the kind of player that the Buccaneers needed to help out Rachaad White this season in the run game. But now Sean Tucker is coming on incredibly strong as well. I'm really kind of hoping that when we see the first team offense, we know we're going to get Rachaad White. He already tweeted out that he's excited to play this Friday against the Miami Dolphins. But I want to see Sean Tucker with that first string offensive line out there with Baker Mayfield under center. I want to see if he's still able to maintain these kinds of runs against a first team defense and behind the first team offensive line. I think that's going to be really telling as well. Can he do these kinds of things against a top defense rather than second and third stringers? But a big part of the rushing success does come from that offensive line, where Graham Barton just continues to be an absolute mauler. Brian Baldinger posted on Twitter a video of Barton lined up with Elijah Klein and Xavier Delgado, and they were just having their way with the Jaguars defensive line. Baldy even said in his tweet that he hasn't seen three rookies play this well together on the inside all preseason long. Todd Bowles told the media that the game is starting to slow down for Graham Barton, so he's looking more like the player that they drafted. And along those same lines, over the weekend, it had been talked about. I can't remember who said it. I want to say it was Rick Stroud had tweeted it out that Todd Bowles had decided who the starting center was going to be, but it wasn't announced yet. Well, J.C. Allen of Bucs Game Day has reported that Barton has won the starting center position and will be the one snapping to Baker Mayfield against the Commanders in just 20 days. I would then expect Barton to line up with Wirfs, Bredesen, Malk, and Gedeke against the Dolphins Friday night when the starters are on the field. Then something else that kind of jumped out to me after Evan brought him up on Friday's episode, Kalen DeLoach had a solid outing. He wasn't perfect, but it was a much better showing than he had against the Cincinnati Bengals, where Vi Jones kind of stole the show as far as the backup inside linebackers were concerned. This time around, DeLoach finished with 5 tackles, which was third best on the team. He's still incredibly raw, but I think the talent is there that DeLoach is going to find his way onto the roster when they announce the 53-man squad. You have Levante, KJ, JJ, Servassier. It's a lot of A's. Anybody notice that? Levante, KJ, JJ, Servassier. But there's a potential opening there for Kalen DeLoach to get one of those last spots, but he's going to need a good showing against the Dolphins to really secure things. So I think it's going to be really telling if he gets a decent number of snaps or if he stays on the sideline once those backups start to rotate into the game. And then finally, Devin Culp, another decent game from him. Couple of catches. He looked passable as a blocker. But the opportunity that he had with Payne Durham being out was a big one. Unfortunately, he didn't get quite as many targets as I would have liked to have seen him get. But 2 catches on 3 targets, 18 yards. That's not a bad day for the rookie tight end. I think he really is starting to work his way in to that number 3 tight end spot. It really depends on what Liam Cohen wants. Does he want a guy like Kokeeft as far as the blocking game is concerned, or is he going to opt more for the bigger pass catching threat in Devin Culp? Again, Friday's game is going to be telling when it comes to the amount of snaps and opportunities that these bubble guys are going to get. Want to jump into the chat real quick and see what you guys enjoyed about the game. I'm going to have to scroll up a little bit here. Youssef says that the running backs were fire, destined for greatness. Jumps in and says the interior O-line has been impressive. Who else is in here? Narov said Braswell garnered some double teams. Absolutely. And that was something that I kind of talked about after the Bengals game, that when he was kind of the only major threat out there, he wasn't out there with Vita Vea and Kalijah Cansey. Yaya Diaby wasn't on the other side. Antoine wasn't out there. You know, these other weapons that Todd Bowles has to get after the quarterback. When offenses don't have to focus on shutting those guys down, then they can put all their focus on those edge rushers like Braswell, like Watts. Jose Ramirez just did such a great job of getting off the snap so quickly. And then his smaller size mixed with the quickness and his incredible bend is what helped him get into the backfield against Cincinnati. And then he did it again against Jacksonville. So once they start to add on to some of these one-on-one opportunities, and as Todd Bowles mentioned, once Braswell is able to work on his feet a little bit more, work on his hand placement a little bit more, Braswell has the makings of somebody who can be a big impact player for this team. Real quick, before we move on, BB King says, what happens if Chase Edmonds is running back number 4? Does he make the team? Absolutely. I think the Buccaneers, without a doubt, are going to carry 4 running backs on their 53-man roster, and then they're probably going to stash another one. Could be DJ Williams, could be some of these other guys that we've seen in preseason. Going to stash at least one of those on the practice squad. But you already have Bucky and Sean Tucker back there receiving kickoffs. You're going to need that rotation there. Chase Edmonds does bring that leadership role, almost kind of a pseudo coach there on the sideline with all of these young guys around him. But, Chase Edmonds is just like Rashad, just like Bucky, not quite the same as Sean Tucker, but with the main 2 running backs, he can run the ball, he can catch out of the backfield, and he can block. You want those guys on your roster. And given the punishment that these running backs take, they're going to want to spread those snaps out a little bit and make sure that their guys are staying fresh and healthy, especially when you get late into these games and Rashad and Bucky can really grind it out on the ground against a tired defense. That's when you're going to see some of these big-time explosive plays, these 20, 30-yard runs, especially from a guy like Bucky Irving that is a one cut and go. As soon as he gets to that second level and starts making guys miss, he is a home run waiting to happen. There is plenty that I did not like on Saturday. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. You've heard us talk a lot about FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Well, we have something a little different for you. Now through September 22nd, all FanDuel customers can bet $5 and get a 3-week free trial of NFL Sunday Ticket from YouTube and YouTube TV. Then, with a YouTube TV base plan, you'll be able to watch every regular season Sunday afternoon out-of-market game. All you need is a Google account and a current form of payment, and you can cancel any time. Right now, the Chiefs and 49ers are tied atop the Super Bowl odds at plus 600, while the Buccaneers are at plus 6,500 to win the big game and have fallen even further to plus 340 to win the NFC South. But the early line has them as 3.5-point favorites in their home opener against the Washington Commanders. Meanwhile, the Edmonton Oilers are the early Stanley Cup favorites at plus 850, and the Boston Celtics are the favorites to repeat as NBA champions at plus 300. Just visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to download America's #1 sportsbook. Wrapping things up here on a live Monday edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. And there were quite a few things that made me wince on Saturday, none more so than the play of the secondary. Parker Washington scored on a 25-yard strike from Mac Jones in the second quarter to put the Jacksonville Jaguars up 7-0, and there was absolutely no reason for him to be that open. I've rewatched that play numerous times, and I still can't really tell whose responsibility Washington was, but it was hideous and it was inexcusable. Now, you had Tyke Smith, was the man in coverage. But it looked like after the play, he was arguing with Marcus Banks and that Washington should have been his assignment. And when you watch Tyke, he looks like he passes Washington off to one of the safeties. Whether Tyke Smith got it wrong, whether the safeties got it wrong, it was a blown coverage somewhere. And there is not a team or a quarterback in the NFL that, if given that kind of open space for a target, isn't going to absolutely burn you. There was no excuse for it. That kind of stuff cannot happen. It has to be cleaned up. That's it. There's no excuse for it. Tyke Smith, if it was his assignment, that's something that he needs to correct moving forward. He needs to understand where he's supposed to be in that. If it was on one of the safeties, then chances are, Marcus Banks probably isn't going to make the team anyway, but that certainly didn't help his chances. Along the same lines, Tavier Thomas had a rough night. Really, there wasn't anyone in the secondary that was overly impressive. And for as well as a lot of them played last week against Cincinnati, that was really disappointing to see them carved up by Mac Jones, of all people. Kind of sticking with the rookies, it wasn't a great showing from Jalen McMillan on Saturday. 1 catch for 6 yards. That's not what we're looking for. He still looks crisp and fluid in his route running, and I don't think the stats are indicative of his abilities. But against the second and third team, McMillan is a guy that should be heavily utilized because he's going to be far better than anyone that he's going up against. To play devil's advocate against myself, maybe that was part of the game plan, was to use some of these other receivers that were going to be open because of the attention that McMillan demands. And that would have given Todd Bowles and Liam Cohen a little bit better of a look at some of these bubble receivers, rather than someone that we already know is locked and loaded on the 53-man roster. He's probably the wide receiver 3 next to Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. I think he's going to be on the depth chart ahead of Trey Palmer to start the season. I would have liked to have seen more. Maybe, that's kind of selfish of me that I want to see, McMillan kind of get unleashed. But I can also see the other side of it where, they know what McMillan brings. They need to see more out of Cody Thompson. They need to see more out of Tanner New, and they need to see, more of some of these other guys. So I want to see more out of Jalen, but I also could kind of understand. I was a little bummed. But then finally, kind of my biggest concern here. We can talk about concerns with the secondary, but again, you didn't have Zion out there. You didn't have Jamel Dean out there. You didn't have Antoine or Jordan Whitehead. So, some of those things they're going to happen, right? You have a rookie out there. He's still learning the system. For as much as we talk about what a high IQ player he is, mistakes are still going to be made. It's a very complex system, especially for corners and safeties in Todd Bowles' defense. But my biggest concern over the course of the first 2 preseason games is the kicking game. Last year, we all thought that things were basically great on special teams, right? Jake Camarda was an absolute beast. We started talking about him as being the real punt god, and he could place it wherever he wanted to. It was just outstanding. And then Chase McLaughlin was nearly automatic. Both of these guys are struggling to open this preseason, and it should make Bucs fans a little bit nervous. McLaughlin went on an absolute tear last year before missing a kick in the divisional round against the Detroit Lions. And since then, he's been a little bit shaky. Camarda can't seem to pin his kicks, the way he used to, and it's leading to touchbacks instead of opposing teams starting inside their 10, even their 5-yard line. Now, I trust both of these guys to be able to figure it out and get back on track, but they need to do it quickly. Kicking woes in Tampa are nothing new, and McLaughlin missing 2 kicks in as many games. And you go back to last year, he's missed a kick in 3 straight games. That can't continue. That absolutely cannot continue. I was all about it when the Bucs paid him, because he was worth it. He had proven himself. He had shown that he was worth that investment. Now it feels like there's a little bit of the yips happening and they need to be worked out. And I sure hope that whatever's going on gets figured out before the Bucs take on the Commanders, because we've seen how many games the Bucs have lost over the last 10 years because of failures in the kicking game. McLaughlin is supposed to be that dude. We need to see him be that dude. So I really hope he has a strong week in practice, and then I want to see him go perfect against the Dolphins. I would even rather the Bucs almost kind of intentionally end up having to kick a field goal, where it's a 3rd and 8 and you hand the ball off. Maybe you get the first down, but you know what? If it leads to a 48-yard field goal attempt, I want to see it. I need to see it. Let's get McLaughlin back on track and let's see him make one of those longer, more difficult kicks and start to get back into the rhythm of things, because it could be a concern if we go into the season and McLaughlin is struggling out of the gate. Jumping into the chat real quick, destined for greatness. I believe the Bucs waived Banks. They picked up a defensive tackle, Matterson. Don't think he makes the roster either. I had not seen that, and going through, I did get notified by Bucs PR. Yes, that did happen. So destined for greatness. Thank you for the update there. So yeah, Banks is off the roster, but I do agree. Matterson is probably not going to make the roster. Could be a practice squad guy, but more than likely this late in the game, he's probably just a camp body to get through the next couple of weeks. Let's see. Land Shark, Tuck and Buck. I love that. The nickname for Sean Tucker and Bucky Irving. I'm a big fan. We need to figure out how to get Rashad White included in that. But Tuck and Buck is very catchy. I love that a lot. Richard in the chat says Bengals and Jags punters definitely outplayed Camarda. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with Camarda, man. Like, he was one of the best punters in the league and just seems to have some placement issues right now. Again, I fully trust his confidence and his sheer ability to be able to get things back on track. I don't think this is going to be a major problem moving forward. At least I hope it doesn't turn into one. But yeah, something is a little off with Camarda. And then Lakita in the chat says valid on McLaughlin. And then, yeah, Richard also said, Bull said they are not adding a place kicker to push McLaughlin. And honestly, I think that's the right move. Don't add additional stress to the kicker that you've already invested in and potentially compound the problem. I realize that the competition could also make him get out of it and get back on track. But at the same time, it could make things even worse. And, we saw that with Aguayo. They brought in competition to try to push him to be a little bit better. Instead, it made him even worse and even more of a head case. McLaughlin is a talented kicker. We know that. We saw it last year. I just hope that he's able to get out of this funk a little bit sooner than later. We are way over on time, so that is going to do it for this episode of Locked On Bucs. Please check out everything going on over at BucsNation.com. Make sure you're following on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at JYarcho_Bucs. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. And of course, make sure you are subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on. So when I go live like this, you get notified and you can join in on the live chat. Or of course, you can follow on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you all to all of you in the live chat. You guys always make this an absolute blast. I love doing these live episodes and interacting with each and every one of you. We will continue to do more of these moving forward. Again, I think the tentative plan, we're always going to go live after a Bucs game for an immediate reaction, that I think we're going to do our final preview episode Thursday nights on YouTube live. Trying to hammer that out on my schedule, but I'll be able to let you know in the coming weeks when we are going to go live on Thursday nights for that final preview. And hopefully you guys can join in the live chat on those. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding day. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.